Dan Pawlowski. You are listening to Our First Fears, a podcast about gateway horror, past and present, with artists working in the genre today. I don't know if I could be more thrilled to share today's conversation with you all. I'm speaking with Rob Renzetti, whose new horror-laden fantasy novel, The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things, is now available from Penguin Workshop. As you'll soon hear, I so enjoyed reading Rob's book, and not merely because it reflects so many aspects of the first fear Rob chose to explore in this episode. The uber-classic Universal monster movies from 1931, Dracula and Frankenstein, both produced by Carl Laemmle Jr. and directed by Todd Browning and James Whale, respectively. And Rob knows of what he speaks. He's had a long career of telling stories, many of which have had to do with monsters and kids and the relationship between the two. If you don't already know, Rob Renzetti is an Emmy Award-winning animator and the New York Times best-selling co-author of Gravity Falls Journal 3 with Alex Hirsch. He's had a hand in making some of my own personal favorite animation projects, including Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, The Powerpuff Girls, Samurai Jack, My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic, and Family Guy. He was the supervising producer of Gravity Falls, and he's arguably best known as the creator of the much-beloved My Life as a Teenage Robot. And most impressive, the guy is super humble. Just an FYI, if you want, you can probably listen to this one with your kids, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. Now, turn down the lights, turn up the volume, and get ready to explore Our First Fears. Hi, Rob.
Hi, Dan.
Thanks so much for joining me on Our First Fears. I'm really excited that you chose the films Dracula and Frankenstein to talk about.
Yes.
I feel like those are some classics.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, and I just reviewed them in anticipation of this podcast, and it was a lot of fun to go back to them again and see them with fresh eyes as an adult, because I haven't seen them in many, many, many years.
Yeah, it's funny because I did the same thing, and honestly, I know I'd seen Frankenstein recently, and I know I got it all mixed up. I was remembering scenes that didn't occur in the movie, and then
Yeah, exactly.
Rewatching Dracula, I was like, I don't know if I've ever even seen this. I think it was it got into my, of course, it's so much in the culture that it got into my head at a very young age, but I don't remember sitting through the movie at all. So it'll be interesting to hear your takes on what those films did to you when you were a kid and, you first saw them. But to start off, I was wondering if you could give a brief introduction, intro yourself, your relationship to the horror genre, and maybe talk about your new book.
Sure. Well, what a delight to do so. My name is Rob Renzetti. I am a longtime veteran of the animation industry, mostly working in television animation. I've been on a number of shows that your audience may or may not know. Started my career at Hanna-Barbera and worked on a show called Two Stupid Dogs, worked on Dexter's Laboratory, moved over to Nickelodeon and worked on a bunch of shorts, and then created my own show called My Life as a Teenage Robot. Post that experience, I was all over the place for a while. I worked on My Little Pony, the new version created by Lauren Faust, called Friendship. My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. I worked on Gravity Falls with Alex Hirsch at Disney, and I worked on another show called Big City Greens, which is very popular at Disney right now. In between, I've worked on lots of different things. I worked on Powerpuff Girls, which was created by my friend Craig McCracken, and most recently, I worked with him again for Netflix on a show called Kid Cosmic that he created.
So basically, you're a legend.
Oh, well, that's I think of legends as people that have been dead for a while. So I have to call myself that. I'm still alive, still working.
I just wanted to see what you'd say.
Oh, okay. Well, I shy away from those kind of things, but I also shy. There's a real bugaboo of me was when people say I helped create your childhood. I don't believe that. I believe children and create their own childhood, and the people
Mm-hmm.
around them create their own childhood. But I'm happy to be part of the pop culture landscape that may have been involved in your childhood.
Yeah,
Anyways,
that's
so
awesome.
I'm still working, not dead yet. Maybe legend someday in 100 or 2 years. But the latest thing I've been working on is a series of books, horror themed. The first one's called The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things. It's out now. It just came out in the middle of July, and it's about this curiously 11-year-old named Zenith Maelstrom, who discovers this very weird, repulsive, hideous-looking satchel on his front porch. And of course, he can't resist bringing it into the house and messing around with it. And he pricks his finger on the ornate latch and gives it a bit of a drop of blood falls into the bag, and that's what it takes to activate the bag. This little weird spider hairball monster comes out and kidnaps his older sister Apogee, drags her illogically into the bag, and he discovers that the bag is a portal to a hideous world called Grabog that lies inside, and he has to go in there. He has to go to Grabog. He has to save his sister, go through many trials in order to get her, and hopefully drag her back to Earth from this other realm that he's discovered inside the horrible bag. And I've been a fan in terms of horror. I've been a fan for most of my life. And that's what we're here to talk about, is how my journey with horror started. But my journey with horror was definitely as a scaredy cat. I started as a scaredy cat at a very young age, and then sometime in my childhood I transitioned.
So many creators I've talked to who do like horror, sort of, and my my own experience has been the same. Were scaredy cats, or self-proclaimed scaredy cats, and I do believe that probably has something to do with how we tend to explore the horror genre later in our lives as artists and makers and stuff like that. So big question for you before we get into the films. Do you remember the first time you ever felt frightened?
I don't, but one of the reasons we're talking about Dracula is it's the first time I remember being frightened of a film and of a concept and of a character, was Dracula. And the way I encountered Dracula was by pure accident. I don't know how old I was. I was very young. And my mother was going out with a friend of hers for lunch. And in order to drop me off, because I don't think I was of school age yet, even if I'd been like in kindergarten, first grade, it was the summer. I honestly don't remember how young I was. It could have been before I was in school at all. She took me over to her friend's house, and they were going to leave me with her friend's much older teenage kids. I think a couple of her daughters were home, and they were just going to watch me for the hour while my mom and her friend went out to lunch. And they were just coincidentally they had like a small kitchen television. They were in the kitchen, and Dracula was on TV, and they were just watching it. And they dropped, I kind of got left with them. I don't know if my mom and her friend were gone already, or if they were just getting ready to go. But anyways, it was kind of like, hey, Rob, have you ever seen Dracula? You want to see? Oh, it's really scary. And like they were winding me up. And I like looked at the screen, and there was Dracula on the screen. And I don't now, like, that's all I saw. I saw like one scene, and I was like, I'm out of here. I don't want to see anymore. And I like left the kitchen. And I don't remember, like, now I've seen the whole film several times, and I don't remember exactly what scene it was. I'm guessing it's the scene where Jonathan Harker comes into the castle and he comes down that giant staircase. Because I remember him being in motion and being very dramatic. It could have been one of the scenes in the crypt, but having rewatched the film now again, Dracula basically stands up in the crypt, and then like he's out of there. Like there's not a lot that goes on in the crypt in the beginning of the film. It was definitely towards the beginning of the film. But anyways, I saw like one scene from Dracula, and I was like just so frightened, and I didn't want to see anymore. I was freaked out. It started, I don't know if it gave me nightmares, but it made me afraid of being in my bedroom at night in the dark on my own. And my father used to put me down at night. I think usually it was him, sometimes my mom. But I remember as a kid, after the experience of like shucking and jiving, doing anything I could do to keep him in the bedroom as long as possible and not leave me alone in my bedroom because I was so afraid that Dracula or some other monster was going to come out of the shadows and get me. And like I always had trouble, like as a kid and through my teen years, I always had trouble getting to sleep. And I think it started with this. It always took me like an hour to get to sleep.
Oh, wow.
Even when I got older and I was no longer afraid of Dracula coming to get me, I always like spent about an hour in bed before I could ever get to sleep. Maybe that was just like I had youthful energy. I don't know, but I was a thinker. I was a real thinker. So I really
Just
spent a lot of time thinking in bed before I ever fell asleep on a nightly basis.
pondering monsters.
Pondering monsters at first,
Oh
pondering,
my
you know,
God.
the later on when Jaws came out in 1975, my parents would let me see it. And illogically for a while, I thought somehow there was a shark under my bed. Like the whole
Mhm.
monster under the bed thing. Like I took it
Yeah.
the illogical conclusion that somehow there could be a shark under my bed. When I knew that sharks only, they had to be in water. I understood this, but somehow I thought Jaws was under my bed for a
I
while
I
too.
did too. I did too. I mean, I only saw Jaws sort of when it came out on television. Um, I was born in 1977,
Oh yeah.
so but I do remember, stories of my mom told me going to see Jaws in Cape Cod with my dad in the theater,
Oh wow.
and
Cape Cod.
she she told me, and I take this with a grain of salt because my mom is a great storyteller, let's
Mm-hmm.
say. And she was like, I was sitting in the theater banging my head against the wall because I was so scared. And I was like, so that was my introduction to the concept of Jaws. So I think even before
Mm-hmm.
I saw the film, I was like, there's this thing out there that scared my mom so badly that she had to bang her head against the wall of the theater. So yeah, I do, and I've had a phobia, a lifelong phobia of sharks, and I
Yeah.
think
Oh, I mean, I love Jaws now, and that's not the film we're
yeah,
talking about. But there certainly could be someone should talk about Jaws on this
yeah,
podcast
I
because
mean
it's an
that's fine.
amazing
We
film.
we can go all over the place, but speaking of monsters under the bed and how Dracula in particular sort of affected you at that time, like what is it with kids and monsters? Like I know that your professional career sort of started with kids and monsters together, Mina and the Count
Yeah.
being one of your early projects. What is it with kids and monsters?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think it's just the concept of it that there's something bad out there that can get you. It's hard. I mean, like, I don't, kids, it feels like what I remember most, some of my earliest memories of a kid is my dad coming home and hugging my mom and me as a very small child, getting in between their legs and like basically climbing up their bodies to get in the middle of that hug, and then getting a thrill out of the fact that I was doing that. I like just like this idea that like early on, like if you have a good childhood, and I did,
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
surrounded you're
me
surrounded
too.
by you're surrounded by love. You're surrounded by the love of your parents and the love of your family and all that. Only as you age do you get to see like, oh, the world isn't all love. You know what I mean? Like, so I
Yeah.
think as a kid, maybe your mind goes to, well, like, what's the opposite of love? What could be the word? What's on the other end of that spectrum, right? And like a creature that's basically designed to do nothing but harm you seems like, as opposed to love you, seems like the opposite end of things. And I think that's why maybe it has such potency over children.
I,
The whole concept.
I love that idea. I think that's spot on.
Yeah, I
I
don't know.
was
I mean, it's funny because you mentioned Mina and Count. Mina and Count is my adult therapy session working through my childhood fears, which was instead of making a monster into a friend, which goes back to my relationship with Frankenstein, which we can talk about as well. But
mhm,
basically, not to jump ahead, but like Frankenstein is the movie that saved me from Dracula. Basically, I
mhm.
don't know why I decided I'd watch another monster movie. It might have been the reputation that Frankenstein had as the good monster, but when I saw Frankenstein and when I saw the scene with little Maria, I think her name is,
Mhm.
the child that he plays with briefly before tossing her in the lake, like in Chicago, they showed that the edited version, which is like you never see him toss the kid in the lake. He just has this moment of fun with this little girl where they're tossing flower petals in the lake and watching them float. And I took from that the idea that like this monster wasn't that bad and that he wanted to be loved. He wanted friends. And so when I finally saw that movie, I was able to, in my nighttime contemplation of monsters, so it occurred to me like, well, if the Frankenstein monster showed up, I would make him my friend. I would offer him my friendship, and he would take it because he's so lonely. and then he would protect me from all the other bad monsters. So I just had to get Frankenstein, or the Frankenstein monster, on my side, and I would be safe. And that was actually a comfort to me. And it was like, it was a story or a concept I kept telling myself every night to like ward off the other monsters, at least in my mind, and like say like, I'll be fine. I'll get the Frankenstein monster to be my friend. The other monsters won't be able to touch me. And I would like, that's how I kind of got over my whole fear of Dracula and other monsters. It's like the idea that there was a good monster out there.
Yeah, brilliant. Did you
anyways.
ever see, there was a reboot, I think, I want to say either it was a Twilight Zone reboot in the 80s. There was an episode where this kid befriends the Shadow Man, who
that sounds familiar.
Who lives under his bed. And,
okay.
you know, the Shadow Man sort of like protects him. And I was so shocked and disturbed by the twist ending for this one. And I'm just going to spoil it because it has to do with our conversation. But, you know, this kid, he's having trouble with bullies, you know, the real monsters in our lives. And he's having trouble with bullies, and the Shadow Man sort of follows him outside of his house and protects him sometimes. And so this kid lures the bullies to a playground to sort of have the Shadow Man, you know, take care of them for him, like beat him up or scare him or something. And so they get to the playground, the bullies are there, it's the middle of the night, the Shadow Man shows up, the bullies see him and start running, and the boy is like, you know, great, you did a good job. But then the Shadow Man starts coming for him, and he's like, wait, you're the Shadow Man, you're supposed to help me. And he's like, oh, I'm somebody else's Shadow Man. I just love that twist.
That's great.
But the idea of monsters being protective also is something that I also sort of glommed onto when I was a kid. And I think that was appealing to me in a lot of ways. I think, you know, I'm going to ask questions a little bit later about the defanging of some of the classic monsters from the early Universal era. But like, when I was a kid, you know, Dracula and Frankenstein had in pop culture sort of become friendly characters.
Yeah.
So you've already talked about a little bit about what scared you about the Dracula film and about what sort of helped you with the Frankenstein film. In watching these movies again, I realized that there's an actor who, I mean, they're both produced by Carl Laemmle in 1931 for Universal.
Yeah.
And I realized that there's an actor that connects both of the films named Dwight Frye.
Yep.
And he played Renfield in Dracula.
Yep.
And Fritz, the sort of like the Igor kind of character.
Yeah. It's weird, right? He's called Fritz.
Fritz.
My mind always thought he was Igor from the beginning, but Igor doesn't appear till like the third or fourth Frankenstein movie.
Yeah. So Dwight Frye, for some reason, more so than anything else in these rewatches for me, was so intense. His performances, I found him to be kind of the scariest part of those films for me now. Like, I think because
he steals Dracula. He steals Dracula from Bela Lugosi. Because he's more understandable as a character, kind of, in a way. You know what I mean? Dracula's just a vampire, and it's just like, okay, he's the other, but Renfield's like a human that's been polluted by Dracula, and he's so creepy. And that laugh he comes up with. I mean, it's worth watching Dracula just for the scenes of Renfield laughing. It is so strange and off-putting and so creepy.
Oh yeah.
And that scene where he where the maid or whatever, or the nurse, collapses and he starts crawling towards her.
Oh my God.
That's the scariest part of the movie, because you cut away before anything happens and you're like, what the heck just happened to that woman? What was Renfield going to do to her? Because he supposedly just eats bugs, and now he's like approaching this human, like, what's he going to do? He doesn't have fangs. He can't bite
No,
her kind of safely like Dracula can. So what is he going to do?
whatever it is, it's going to be much worse.
Yeah.
I mean, we see how Mina, the one of the main characters that Dracula becomes infatuated with, she still looks pretty after she's bitten and sort of
Yeah.
starts to fall under his control. But like, what would happen to the maid without those very precise little fangs that can,
Yeah.
dip into the skin and then pull away?
Exactly.
It's a really freaky moment, and it
Yeah.
reminded me of, and I wonder what the truth of this is. But did you ever watch Twin Peaks?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
So Bob, the character of Bob,
Yeah.
who basically, I'm not, no spoilers for Twin Peaks, but he's a very creepy character who shows up in Laura Palmer's memories. Laura Palmer being
Hmm.
the murder victim. And there's a scene, a very famous scene in Twin Peaks, where Bob is crawling towards Laura, her point of view, and it was like, it was exactly Renfield crawling towards that maid, and I was like, I wonder if David Lynch was inspired by
I'm
that as
sure.
well.
I'm sure he was. I mean, yeah. I mean, to me, it's the most notable scene in the whole film. If
Yeah,
I'd seen that as a kid, I don't know how I would have reacted. Because for all his theatrical intensity, and he certainly has screen presence, Bela Lugosi, he was just basically just standing on screen, maybe walking on screen. He wasn't doing anything particularly creepy when he freaked me out. But if I'd seen that Renfield scene, I don't know what I would have made of it.
the other thing that Bela Lugosi was famous for was pulling faces, like
Mm-hmm.
the eyes, the scene
Yeah.
where he pretends to be the stagecoach
Yes.
um, driver, and his face is darkened and his eyes are just white.
Yeah.
He's staring. I was like, that is also really freaky to me.
It's weird, and they do that several times in the movie. They have these weird close-ups of him where he's just like staring in the camera with weird lighting on his eyes. It's very effective. It's a cool image, and that's really cool. But yeah, he's got screen presence. Just like he just really doesn't. I think the most important relationship for Dracula is the one with Van Helsing. Like more
Hmm.
so than the women he's biting or Renfield who he bites. It's more like Van Helsing's the only thing basically standing in his way. And their scenes together, to me, are the most interesting ones that involve Dracula's. Them kind of the battle of wills and wits
Yeah,
between the two of them.
yeah. Van Helsing has got his number and he knows it.
Yeah, immediately, right? Like he gets like he's in like Van Helsing's supposed to be a man of science, but he's like, I believe in vampires. Scientifically proven by this. Like the first thing with Van Helsing, he's examining Renfield's blood. He's done something to Renfield's blood in a test tube. He's done some kind of
Oh
chemical
yeah.
experiment on his blood, and he's like, "Yep, we got a vampire on our hands." I'm like, "Oh yeah, okay, that's how." I didn't know there was a scientific test for vampires around, but apparently there is.
um, Other images that struck me as I was rewatching these films, and you mentioned a little bit like the sets,
Mm-hmm.
those epic staircases. Like I feel
Yeah.
like as a kid, like those kinds of sets were burned into my head, and I as much as they sort of repulsed me and like made me feel a little weird, like I also really wanted to go to the castles and
Oh
see
yeah.
these grand giant sweeping entryways in these staircases. Like and I know you've used staircases in some of your animation work as well. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the animation, the first Mean Account short, I definitely was looking at Dracula again. I looked at the and tried to get some of that architectural stuff into the few scenes in Dracula's castle or the Count's castle at the beginning of the Mean Account short. Um, so that was definitely an influence. I mean, all that kind of gothic stuff, like 1930s, has been a huge influence on the style of the stuff I've done. Not only the Mina shorts, but which actually had just a touch of that. But Teenage Robot, my show, we made an effort to kind of look at 1930s media of all kinds, pulp magazines and poster art from the 30s, industrial design. I have like very big, thick Art Deco books that are like we used as reference when we were doing my show to like, what does a teacup look like or a teapot look like in the 30s?
Oh, that's
So we were
cool.
kind of in like trying to make it like 1930s retro, but also like the show is supposed to take place in a mythical future where like, what was the future they imagined in the 1930s? That's the future we're in. So 1930s affects the design, but there's, you know, there's rockets and robots and all that kind of stuff as well, not just what actually existed in the 1930s. But
Yeah.
so yeah, the 30s are a big touchstone for me in terms of like pop culture and the media and stuff. So yeah, all the sets and definitely there's an influence from German expressionist cinema and stuff that they
Oh yeah.
are talking about, like and Frankenstein's castle is it's got all these weird angles to it,
Yeah.
and the cemetery at the beginning of Frankenstein, like there's no headstone that's like straight up. They're all weird
Yeah.
cockeyed angles and on hills. It's the hilliest cemetery you'll ever see in the world. Like everybody's got a giant mound they're buried underneath.
And skeletons just
Yeah,
hanging everywhere.
giant skeletons out.
It's funny talking about styles, the difference between these two movies. Like Todd Browning directed Dracula. James Whale was the director of Frankenstein.
Yep.
And in watching the two films back to back, basically, this past week, I just felt like James Whale's style, his vision was a little bit more elegant, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And
I think you're tiptoeing around the idea that Frankenstein's a much better movie. Frankenstein's a much better movie on all accounts.
It is. Yeah.
It's, you know, stylistically, it's more interesting. The every aspect of it is, the story's more interesting. The characters are more interesting. It's less stolid. Like Dracula feels very much like a movie that just came out of the silent era and doesn't quite know what to do with sound yet, or anything really. Like there's these big passages of silence, and that's because there's no music in the body of the film. It's all there's end title music and in the front title have music, and that's it. And actually Frankenstein's the same, except that Frankenstein has all this sound design that swallows up the silence in a way that doesn't. First of all, there's not these weird awkward pauses. It's just like the dialogue moves and the characters react to each other in a rhythm that makes more sense. And there's like all the weird experimental noises from all the experimental machines when they're creating the monster. And then there's this huge wedding festival in the villa because Frankenstein's getting married to Elizabeth.
Oh, those tracking shots are incredible.
Yeah, it's very dynamic and very lively and so much better of a film. And we're not even talking about Karloff's performance yet, which is amazing as the monster, or the creature as he preferred. But like that's a whole different subject. But like just as a film, and like, yeah, the camera's more dynamic. The camera moves a lot more. Like in Dracula, like the cinematographer was just kind of discovering how to do tracking shots, and there's a few tracking shots, but like most of it's very much like a stage play, like where the camera's just kind of locked down, and we stay locked for the length of the shot, and some of the shots are quite lengthy. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump on what you were saying, but I think you're trying to be too kind to Dracula, and I love both the film. I love both the films from a character perspective. Like Dracula's a great character, but like from a film, watching the films, like Frankenstein's just a much better film on all levels.
They're just very different. They're just very, very different styles. Like I almost felt like Dracula was a series of vignettes, you know?
Yes.
And Frankenstein sort of had more of a propulsion through towards the climax. Let's talk about Frankenstein's monster, or the creature.
Yeah.
What about that character made you feel safe? Made you feel like you could have him in your life and be
I mean, I think it comes as a kid, I think it came down to that scene with the little girl, but like rewatching the whole film, like from the beginning, the minute the monster appears, like he feels so vulnerable. He feels so like that first scene where he's brought into the lab and Frankenstein is kind of directing him like a dumb dog around, like sit down, do this. And and he's reacting, and he's, you know, you get a sense of like, this guy's big, and there's a sense of menace, but there's also a sense of like, I'm a newborn baby and I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm looking to you, and I somehow know that you're the one that created me, and you are an authority to me, and I'm looking for answers from you. And then Frankenstein does this weird thing, is like, I've kept him in the dark all this time. Like, first of all, why?
Right.
Why have you kept him in the dark?
He's so
Maybe
cruel.
like, there's no explanation. There's no explanation, but like, okay, it's been darkened, and now I'm going to open up the skylight and show him the light. And the monster or the creature has this crazy, beautiful reaction where he gets up and like reaches towards the light, and he's like, he has joy in this moment, and then like it's instantly, okay, that's enough, we'll close it back down. And the monster's like, what? And he does this amazing pleading gesture with his hands. It's amazing pantomime performance by Karloff. And you realize, like, he's like, this is the first good thing I've had. I wanted more of it. Why did you take it away? And it's just like such a poignant moment. I don't know how much of that I would have picked up on as a kid, but like,
oh yeah,
it's like you feel for the monster more so than any character in that film. And soon after that, like, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, maybe you were just about to say this, but like immediately after they shut the skylight and the monster is sort of like, why'd you do that? Fritz, the assistant, comes in with his torch and starts beating Karloff with fire.
Yeah,
and it never stops from there. They just keep beating him with fire.
Yeah,
and then like,
it's really
why
weird.
Is he so evil? I'm like, because you guys are the monsters.
Yeah, like the next scene is like him down and put him in the cellar, and then like he's in the cellar, and Fritz comes in with the torch again and starts messing with him. And Frankenstein's there for a minute. He's like, no, Fritz, leave him alone. Just leave him alone. Let's go. And then Frankenstein leaves and like leaves Fritz behind. Fritz is like, I'm not going to go. I'm going to torture him with the flame some more. And like, there's this scene, like Karloff is literally lying in the corner and the flame is like right above his head. And you're like, I'm like, I want Frankenstein to kill Fritz. I mean, the monster. I want the monster to kill Fritz, like right now. Like, he's horrible. He's being horrible to this poor creature. And you're like, you have so much sympathy for the creature at that point. Like, I'm on the creature side from the rest of the movie on. I don't care what he does. Like, anything he does after that is like justified in my mind. I'm like, when he hangs Fritz, I'm like, yeah, of course he does. And even Frankenstein goes like, oh, Fritz always tortured him. He always tormented him, like excusing the creature's behavior. I'm like, yeah, but you could have stopped that. Why didn't you just fire Fritz? Like, get Fritz out of there. What do you need Fritz for anymore? Like, what's Fritz doing for you? He helped you create the creature. Like, he's done. His job is done. Put him on pension or send him away for a few weeks. Why is he still here? Like, what's he here for? To torture the monster and make him into it's ridiculous. Like, what are you doing? I mean, let's say this though. Like, Frankenstein in the movies is much more caring than Frankenstein in the book. In the book, he like creates his creature and like instantly runs away. Like, after one look at what he created, he like gets freaked out and leaves, just bolts and leaves the creature like literally 1 minute old to like fend for himself for the rest of his life. Like, see you later. Nope, this was a mistake. Like, gotta get out of here.
I mean, this has to be in both forms, the book and the film. It has to be a kind of indictment on responsibility. In terms of what we make and what we find and what we present to the world. Like, you can't make something and then run away. Like, speaking of what the subtitle of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley was, a modern Prometheus or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, I just saw Oppenheimer, and there were the comparisons to the Prometheus, the Promethean myth.
Yeah.
And Oppenheimer as well. It's like, can you imagine if Oppenheimer created, or like his team created this bomb and then was like, I'm too scared, let's run away. It's kind of like, imagine like creating the thing that could harm you and then taking no responsibility for it.
Yeah, it's weird. It's really weird. I mean, Frankenstein's great. He's a great character in the movie. And Colin Clive, I think, is the guy who plays him. He's great. Like he's really charismatic, and it's fun to watch him
Yeah.
on screen. But like, you're definitely on the creature's side versus Frankenstein. Like, yeah,
Oh, for sure.
what have you done? Like, he just kind of like bailed. Like, you get sick, and then like he lets is this the other doctor, Dr. Waldman, also played by the same guy who played Van Helsing
Oh
in
yeah,
Dracula.
I thought that was the same guy too. I wasn't
Yeah,
sure.
he's the other overlap between the two films. Like basically Waldman says like, yeah, I'll take care of it. I'll kill the creature for you. And it's like, okay, I'm going to go back to my castle then, my real castle, and just marry my girlfriend. You take care of the monster
Well,
I created for me.
we'll have a huge party, and
Yeah,
it'll be fabulous.
it'll be
And
great. I'm sure that creature thing, that the a man created from scratch that I like labored on for years, and gave him a week or two maybe to see if it would work out. Yeah, I bailed on that. Now time to do something different.
yeah, it's so funny. I wonder, for today's audiences, like even kids coming to find this movie, and I'm not quite sure how they would anymore. Do you think it's possible that these early Universal monster movies are still scary, not only for adults, but like, do you think a child like you were, having caught a
Yeah, I don't
glimpse
know.
of Dracula, would still be scary today?
I don't know. Probably not, but maybe. I mean, it depends, I guess, on the the pop culture exposure of that kid. I would say yes and no. I think there's potency and power there in the concepts, and the execution. Is it varies a little bit. I don't know that just looking at Dracula on screen is enough to make anybody afraid of that creature like I was kind of afraid of it. But maybe, I know. I mean, every person's different, and they have different reactions to things, and some things creep people out, and the same things don't bother someone else at all. I think that scene with Renfield would creep anybody out. Honestly, like him crawling along the floor, that would really.
Oh, the
I
Renfield
think
one,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that would. I think that's creepy today, just as creepy as it was back in the 1930s.
Yeah, I think so
Um,
too.
yeah, I don't know. It's weird. I know this kind of stuff loses potency over time, right? And like you said, Dracula and Frankenstein are such pervasive pop culture things, regardless of their origins. It's
Mhm.
and not necessarily scary anymore, just more like, the same thing that happened to Freddy Krueger in the like 80s. Like,
Yeah,
he went from being really creepy to being like, hey, it's your friend Freddy Krueger. I'm gonna make a few jokes, kill a few
I'm gonna
people.
I'm gonna host MTV for a little while. You
Yeah.
know,
Uh,
um, yeah. My first, I looking back, because like I said earlier, I don't remember watching these movies as kids, and even just as an adult, have vague recollections of them. But my first introduction to the characters were probably on cereal boxes, and
sure.
what could be less scary than a cereal box?
Are you
I
talking about
agree.
like are you talking about like Count Chocula and
Yeah,
those
Count Chocula,
brands? Frankenberry,
Frankenberry, Boo Berry.
Booberry. There
I
was a
think there was also
werewolf.
a wolf. Yeah,
Yeah, there
Wolfman.
was a werewolf one, which I never saw as a kid. But then, like, someone
Yeah,
said, like, yeah, there's a
supposedly
werewolf
people.
one too. I'm like,
I never saw the werewolf one out and about when I was a
it
kid,
was
but
the rarest of ones, I guess. I don't know why.
and in terms of pop culture, we have explored the horror of these kinds of creatures many times. The remakes of Dracula, the
Mm-hmm.
Francis Ford Coppola one,
Mm-hmm.
um, the Kenneth Branagh Frankenstein in the '90s with Robert De Niro as the creature.
Which is truly ridiculous. A truly ridiculous movie.
And so we've explored the attempts to recreate the
I think
horrors, but
there's a new Dracula coming out now, right? The Demeter, about like
oh, that one actually does look scary.
that looks good. Like, that's a cool idea. Like, the thing that's barely touched on in the movie, the original movie, the transport of him via sea from Transylvania to England.
Yeah,
They're gonna do a whole movie that looks cool. That looks really
yeah.
cool.
You get that one shot on the boat of the silhouette of the captain tied to
Yeah,
the the steering wheel. Um,
I guess that was going to be a bigger thing, but when the depression hit, they like cut back on the budget for the film quite a
oh, I
bit,
didn't
and so
realize that.
all the other footage, I guess, all because I was listening to commentary, all the other footage in that where you see like the storm-tossed boat and all that, that's all reused from an earlier silent film. It's just like another film that Laemmle, that Universal owned, and they just reused the footage.
Oh,
And that's how they did that. And so you have Renfield in the hull with Dracula in his box, but there's nothing
having
else.
absolutely no problem, like not experiencing the same kind of storm that's happening.
No,
outside.
exactly. It's very calm down there. Very calm in the hull.
Well, listen, I want to talk a little bit about how these two films, possibly, maybe consciously or unconsciously, might have inspired moments from horrible bag of terrible things.
Okay, sure. Let's go.
Yeah,
Let's
I don't know.
see what you discovered.
I don't know if you purposely, like, did you purposefully
No,
imagine? Okay.
No, it's all subconscious. Any connection between these two films in my book is subconsciously there.
Okay, it's very interesting.
There were no direct thought process took me from one to the other.
So, okay, Albert, the Patchwork Man.
Yes.
Very clearly was a Frankenstein sort of, avatar, or if you will. I don't know what the right word is, but as I'm reading it, like, you did this thing where Zenith, the character, the main character, is looking for help to find his sister. He's discovered this gargoyle, who has agreed to assist him if the gargoyle can eat his ear grits.
That's right.
Which, I'm sorry, it's such a visceral image for me. But
trying to get a little body horror into a middle grade book as best I can.
But also I love it. I love that Kriebel the gargoyle is so obsessed with getting into Zenith's ears. But here you have Albert, the Patchwork Man, who is clearly a kind of a Frankenstein monster. But then the twist is, and I don't, if anybody hasn't read the book or plans on reading the book, he sort of also becomes the scientist. Like he's like, Albert is both the monster and the the monster, but also like the Frankenstein,
the creator. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. It's not something that did occur to me consciously, but yeah, no, there's definitely the parallels there. I mean, there's also the connection. There's also the theme of like Albert wanting friends and how he goes about getting friends,
right,
without spoiling anything. But like the idea that part of his creation process is creating friends for himself. And it is all tied up in that. And, again, like I said, I didn't really think of these things when I was writing the book, but it's not very, you don't have to go very deep to make the connections as you just did. Like the way I was just like looking for weird, creepy images that are different and not something I'd seen before. Another thing that I had that was there as a child was, again, this is probably from the 1930s. One of the few things that survived from my own mother's childhood is she had one of the Raggedy Ann and Andy books, like an original book from I think it's from the 30s, maybe even earlier, that she got as a kid. She was born in 1932, so she was a kid in that era. And for some reason, this one book was out in our dining room as a kid. Like, it was just, there was this weird end table that had like a little space below for like, put your reading material in here. And it was in there, and I would look at it occasionally as a kid. So I was fascinated by these living rag dolls. So again, definitely pulling from my own childhood, and like, I wasn't creeped out by them, but I thought it was fascinating. They looked very strange. They were definitely different. We did one of the first episodes of Teenage Robot. She dresses up in like a rag doll costume to try and pass off as being human in public. And so I definitely went to that well again when it came to Horrible Bag, and we actually call him Raggedy Albert. Zenith starts to call him Raggedy Albert.
Yes, exactly.
Because he is, again, a patchwork figure, except much larger. It's like 7, 8 feet tall, something like that. Like Frankenstein, like oversized, big.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
apparently gentle, seems to be gentle, at least at
Yeah,
first.
he
So
just wants to make breakfast for his friends.
that's right.
And I love the line after all is said and done with Albert, um, that Zenith says to Kriebel, it's like, you wanted me, like your friend was gonna do this thing to me. And Kriebel's like, he's not my friend. And Zenith is like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, haven't you seen what he's done to his friends?
Yeah.
Like, such a good line. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, the other things I'm sort of noticing as a connection between Dracula and Frankenstein. The big bad in your book, the characters call the great and holy worm, Holey, worm.
Hmm.
W, I'm sorry, yeah,
That's
W
W. Yeah.
U R M,
WURM. Yes.
great and holy worm. And he kind of exudes this kind of power over the people of Grabog
Hmm.
in the same way I feel like that Dracula does, this kind of, you know, this mysterious being that
Hmm.
you want to stay away from, like the beginning of Dracula. You know, the townspeople in Transylvania are like, you don't want to go over to that area, Dracula's castle. Like that's
Yeah.
bad. We don't say his name, you know, like that kind of thing. So there's a connection there as well. The other thing that I noticed with the Great and Holy Worm is this concept of what he wants to do to Apogee, Zenith's sister,
Hmm.
and it's called the merging, right?
Yes.
And it's a mysterious thing. We're not quite sure what will happen, but it also kind of felt a little bit vampiric.
Hmm.
You know,
Sure.
you want
I
to.
mean, I don't.
I'm
You
just
keep
I'm just
going. It's,
I'm just pointing things out to you, and
I mean, the worm appears in this blood red cloak.
yeah,
He's not a. All what you've said. It's all true. Uh, what he's meant to do to her is meant to be mysterious, and we never really get an answer necessarily in book one about what it all means. But yeah, no, he definitely has that kind of more air of mystery. He's kind of a more mysterious monster in the vein of Dracula for sure. Like it's I should say it's not even he, it's it.
yes,
Really, there's no particular gender, and there's no what exactly it is a little bit up for debate. Like even what appears before you as the worm, it's a little bit hard to get a grasp on exactly what the essence of that character is, just based on his own physical appearance and his physical parts. Without again revealing things that happen in the book for people that we're trying
sure,
to lure into reading the book or who haven't read it yet. Like I don't want to spoil anything, but yeah, I mean he basically is he is as if Dracula had decided he wanted to rule Transylvania instead of just be
right.
in Transylvania. He is kind of the ruler of this land, and he rules through fear. Everybody is just afraid of him. It's the kind of you're kind of king that you never want to meet in person. You never want to be. You want to stay away from it as long as you can. um, uh, you know, though he has people that do worship him, or creatures that worship him, and or her or it again. I'm giving it the male. I'm equating it with Dracula and making it male, but it is an it. But the worm is kind of the most mysterious part of the land, and that's obviously on purpose. And more will be revealed, and more will be forthcoming in the sequels, which I'm currently writing. But
So there are sequels. I know I've heard of the second one. What is the title, and when's that one coming out?
the second one is called The Twisted Tower of Endless Torment. Um, uh, right now, it's slated to be out early next year, January right now. But yeah, the third one is the big question mark in terms of what it's called when it comes out. I'm currently supposed to be writing it as I speak with you, but
Okay,
I have just started on it. I've just got Zenith is about to re-enter Grabog for yet again, but he isn't there yet. So I'm just got him wound up and got him moving down the tracks.
well,
The way I usually write is I gather all my ideas, I throw them together into a big crazy outline, which really isn't vaguely I have a vague idea of I have a good idea what the plot is and what all the story points are. But in terms of how I get from point A to point B, I kind of just throw ideas at the wall, throw them all down, put a question mark on the end of every sentence so none of them seem like they're definite, and then just kind of figure it out then I write from front to back. I write straight ahead for a first draft anyways, and then go back in and figure out what's not working.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm kind of in the beginning of this one, but I kind of know
Fascinating.
where I'm supposed to end up. So we'll see. But
it's cool to hear. Yeah, it's cool to hear what your process is. Is it how does that differ from your background in animation in terms of writing and characters?
It's similar, but in animation, you are usually figuring out the story with a group of people, whether it's a large group of people or a small group of people. You're usually in a writer's room, and you guys kind of plot out the episode so you know what all your story beats are supposed to be ahead of time. And then if you're the writer, you go back and write it. Either you write full on outline or you write a full script. And then you have to show it to people and get notes. And sometimes you're on target and you do things, and sometimes the vague idea that you guys came up with, like you'll the creator or the story editor will be like, oh no, what we wanted to do in Act 3 was more like this, and you'll go back and revise. So it's basically just it's similar process. It's just collaborative. And if I decide I'm going to change something in the middle of my book, I'm free to do that. If I decide I'm going to change something in the middle of a script, I could either get praised as it being better or bonged for it being wrong and told to do it again how we all agreed to do it in the first place.
Yeah.
So there's no, I've had a great relationship with Penguin Workshop, who I'm writing the Horrible series for.
Yeah.
And I presented them like basically a bullet pointed outline for books 2 and book 3. So they know what's to come, but I did vary a little bit from the bullet points in book 2, and I'm sure I'll vary a little bit from the bullet points in book 3, because you just discover things as you go along and decide, oh, this is better. And luckily they've agreed with all the changes I've made on books 2 and 3, and not so far so good. But it's mostly the difference is it's just basically up to me.
Yeah.
And I'll bounce things off a few trusted friends and ask them what they think. But basically, at the end of the day, it's all my decision, and that's the beauty of writing the books as opposed to working on animation.
So much more intimidating.
It is. It's intimidating, yeah, because it's all on you. But at the end of the day, it's like if I'm pleased, I hope the readers will be pleased, and I hope that's the case. But if I'm satisfied as a storyteller and I feel like I've done the right thing, I think it'll go over well with other people, hopefully. Regardless, cool. I'm writing the stories I want to write, and I have the freedom to do that. So it's been awesome. So far been a great experience.
I don't know if you knew this, but we share the same editors at Penguin Workshop, Alex and Rob.
Oh, you do? Okay, I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know if you had the exact same editors.
They've been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. I love them. I love working with them.
Shout out to Alex and Rob.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I wanted to sort of finish up with something that I read in the newspaper this morning. And I know that there's a difference between the two words worm and worm, W-O-R-M and W-U-R-M. But I read this morning that there was a headline that scientists have managed to awaken a 46,000-year-old W-O-R-M. And have you heard
No, I haven't heard this.
I mean,
it's news to me.
It was a way to wake up this morning, find out that they had found this sort of ancient worm from permafrost in Siberia, slowly managed to wake it up, and it immediately started giving birth in the petri dish.
Oh my. Why do I feel like we are actually at the start of a horror movie in our own reality?
I know.
This is like John Carpenter's The Thing. Like, what are you doing? What are you guys doing? Don't do it.
Have we learned nothing from science fiction? And
we've learned nothing. If anything's true about the human race, is that we learn nothing. We repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again, which I guess is more fodder for us as writers of horror fiction, right? We'll never run out of material as long as the human race is around. they'll be creating real life horrors, and we can fictionalize them.
It's human nature.
Oh my
They're,
God.
just as long as the scientists don't just, run away from the babies and leave them to be
Exactly,
like
right? Like they
Frankenstein.
run away, and then 5 years later, there's a colony of worms marching on us from the North Pole.
Well, listen, Rob, this has been a really fun conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time away from book 3
Yeah,
of
well,
horrible bag,
thank
and
you.
yeah,
It's been
you
a
know,
pleasure talking with you, Dan. I had a lot of fun.
good,
I
good,
mean,
good.
if anybody is interested, look, I will say there's value to be seeing both of these old films or any of the old Universal monster themed movies if you're a fan of horror, because this is kind of the start of movie horror. These two films, like Dracula, basically was the first horror. Well, that's not true. There's like the earlier silent stuff with Lon Chaney, but like
But
this is basically.
we've got to mention Nosferatu before we say
Oh
goodbye
yeah,
too.
of
Yeah,
course. Nosferatu is amazing, and Dracula was totally influenced by Nosferatu. At least was what they said in the commentaries, that like
yeah,
Tom Browning was looking at it, and definitely they were looking at it with Frankenstein as well,
yeah.
um, and the Golem,
Oh
another
yeah,
German movie,
that's a great
definitely
one.
influences Frank. I mean, this is, but yeah, as far as modern American movie history, like this kind of is what this is what started off horror and kept it going, and. Definitely, if you want to watch one, watch Frankenstein. It's fantastic.
I
It really
agree.
is.
I
It's still
agree.
a great movie. Boris Karloff's performance, he became a star from it, and he
Yeah,
deserved to be a star after it because it's amazing. Amazing.
it was fun to look back at these, so I appreciate you suggesting them.
No, I'm glad I suggested him too, because I had to look at him again, and I loved it. It was a lot of fun.
Many thanks to Rob Renzetti for suggesting such a fun fear, and for taking time out of his busy writing schedule to speak with me. I also need to thank Rob for being such a good sport. In this episode, I learned that sometimes folks shy away from being called actual legends to their faces, especially if they're still among the living, like Rob so very much is. And also, I realized only afterward that I'd asked Rob if he'd ever watched the show Twin Peaks, even knowing that one of his most popular projects is a kind of animated mashup of The X-Files and the aforementioned Twin Peaks. If you've never seen Gravity Falls, it is epic. Check it out for some creepy and silly fun. And please go get your copy of The Horrible Bag of Terrible Things. If you're a fan of Rob's animation, you'll absolutely devour his book, hopefully before it devours you. And keep an eye out for the next one in the trilogy, The Twisted Tower of Endless Torment, which is currently scheduled to torture you January of 2024. I'd also like to thank you for listening. I'm finally finding my footing with these talks, and every week I'm learning something new. So I'm feeling more confident asking you to subscribe to Our First Fears wherever you listen to podcasts. And, if you'd like, you can follow our social media at Our First Fears, one word, on the site formerly known as Twitter, as well as on Instagram. You can also reach out at ourfirstfears@gmail.com. If you do want to get in touch, one thing I'd like to know is what kind of monster you relate to most. Scary and bitey, like Dracula? Gentle and clueless, but willing to lash out if poked with fire, like Frankenstein's creature? Or maybe long dormant and ready to give birth, like the prehistoric worm that's recently been defrosted in the Arctic? Thanks again for your precious time. I'm Dan Poblocki, wishing you sweet dreams and pleasant nightmares.